So here's another story, and honestly, one of the most frustrating ones I've ever dealt with. I've lived in my neighborhood for about 3 years now, and for the most part, it's been pretty peaceful. Most of my neighbors are nice, and I don't usually have many complaints. But there is one thing I really hate about where I live, the HOA. If you're not familiar, an HOA is basically a group that sets rules for the neighborhood. The idea might have started with good intentions, but I've seen way too many HOAs do more harm than good. Ours is run by a board of people who seem to enjoy making life difficult for residents, especially me. When I first moved in, they sent me a flashy trifold pamphlet trying to get me to join. Stock photos, all that glossy stuff. But I wasn't interested. I didn't want to be controlled by a bunch of self-appointed rulemakers, so I ignored it. A few weeks later, someone from the HOA actually showed up at my door asking if I'd received their membership packet. I told them I had, but I wasn't joining. They tried convincing me for a bit, then left. Or so I thought. Turns out, ignoring the HOA was just the beginning of a 2-year nightmare. They found every little excuse to harass me, whether it was about my grass being too long or something else completely minor. They'd send notes, mildly threatening letters, and even claimed they could take legal action if I didn't follow their rules. I never gave in, but I did keep track of everything: photos, letters, messages, anything that showed what they were doing. And honestly, it was exhausting. The worst of it came from one particular HOA member we'll call Karen. She lives on my street, toward the end. I hadn't even met her before this whole mess started. From what I heard around the neighborhood, she was known for being overly nitpicky, harsh, and treating everyone like they were beneath her. My neighbor across the street even described her as a kind of cartoon snob, and honestly, that description fits perfectly. Anyway, here's how things went from annoying to full-on ridiculous. Recently, I went on a week-long trip to visit family in another state. When I got back, I saw 2 trucks parked inside my garage. Let me repeat that, 2 trucks, not mine, sitting in my garage. I live alone, and I don't even own a truck. So yeah, I was confused, and immediately noticed Karen standing outside, admiring her vehicles like nothing was wrong. I walked over and asked her what her trucks were doing in my garage. Her response? She didn't even pretend to be surprised or guilty. Just scoffed and said, "You left your garage door open." I replied, "Yeah, maybe that was my mistake, but that doesn't give you the right to park your cars in my space." She looked at me like I was the unreasonable one and said, "Your open garage was an invitation." There's a clause in the HOA rules that says open garages count as community parking. That was the last straw. First off, I'd never joined the HOA. Second, I knew that wasn't true. But she stood there, smug and unbothered, claiming authority over my property like it was no big deal. Then she even threatened to sue me if I didn't let her keep parking there. I was just back from a long trip, exhausted, and honestly didn't feel like arguing right then. I parked on the curb and focused on getting settled back into my house. But the next morning, first thing I did was call the police. When they arrived, I explained everything: how Karen had parked her trucks in my garage without permission, how she claimed some weird HOA rule gave her the right to do it, and how she kept sending me harassing notes and letters. I also showed them the photos I'd taken over the years, proof of all the times the HOA had targeted me unfairly. Karen must have been watching from her house, because she came storming over the second she saw the officers. She repeated the same argument, that open garages mean communal parking, and that I should just be neighborly. She even mentioned her position on the HOA board, like it gave her special privileges. Thankfully, the officers listened to both sides and clearly weren't buying her nonsense. They agreed that while the HOA might have those kinds of rules, they only applied to people who were members. Since I'd never joined, Karen's argument fell apart fast. Still, they told me the issue was more of a civil matter than a criminal one, meaning they couldn't just remove the trucks on the spot, but that I could pursue legal action if needed. That night, I talked to friends about what to do. One of them suggested a clever plan, a form of malicious compliance, that would make Karen think she won. I liked it. The next day, I approached Karen and told her I'd changed my mind. She could keep her trucks in my garage. Said I didn't want any more trouble and that it wasn't a big deal anyway. She lit up. Suddenly, she wasn't yelling anymore. She was condescending and smug, saying things like, "Glad you finally came to your senses," and "She won the battle, but I'd win the war." So that night, I waited until her trucks were still parked in my garage, exactly where she'd left them, and called my friend. We pulled up in our cars and parked right in front of the garage, blocking her trucks inside. Technically, I was allowing her to park there, just not letting her drive them out. She never said anything about moving them after all. The next morning, I barely made it through the door when Karen knocked, furious. She screamed at me that I had no right to block her access and demanded I move my cars immediately. And honestly, it felt amazing. I calmly told her that I didn't have room to park anywhere else. The street was reserved for cleaning that day, and I couldn't leave my car on the curb. I reminded her that I wasn't the one parking illegally, she was. She tried poking holes in my reasoning, but there wasn't much she could say. Eventually, she switched tactics, begging me to move my cars instead of yelling. She listed off all these reasons why she needed her trucks: volunteering, church events, some rally I'm not even sure half of it was real. But I held firm. Then I dropped the ultimatum. "I'll move my cars if you can show me the official HOA clause that gives you the right to use my garage, and if you apologize for all the harassment from you and the HOA. That's when she really lost it. She tried offering me discounted HOA memberships, then straight up cash to just move my cars. But I didn't budge. She eventually stormed off, probably expecting me to cave again. But this time, I didn't. A week passed. Her trucks were still stuck in my garage. I felt a little bad for my friend, who had to leave his car there, but he insisted it was fine. He wanted to help teach Karen a lesson. Eventually, the story spread. I was catching up with my neighbor across the street and mentioned what happened. She agreed that Karen was being absurd, and apparently, word got around fast. A few days later, a group of my neighbors came over. What started as a casual conversation turned into a collective agreement. Karen and the HOA had been pushing people around for far too long. They decided they wanted to support me, and together we gathered all the evidence we had against the HOA. Years of complaints, photos, and stories of their overreach. Honestly, I wasn't even sure we were going to court. I think the goal was just to scare them into backing off. It worked. The HOA caught wind of what we were doing and quickly sent out a formal letter apologizing for the issues their association had caused. They even addressed the fact that Karen had gone too far and apparently removed her from the board. Karen showed up later that week, quieter than usual. She apologized and agreed to take her trucks out. I guess losing her position in the HOA hurt her pride enough to stop causing trouble. To be honest, I feel a mix of emotions about the whole situation. I don't wish ill on anyone, but Karen definitely brought this on herself. She treated people like garbage the second she got a bit of power, and now that it's gone, she's learned a hard lesson. After all that, I even got a smart garage door system installed, just in case she ever tried something like that again. It connects to my phone, lets me know when it's open or closed, and makes sure I never accidentally leave it open for someone to misuse. One small piece of advice from me: always check your doors, literally and figuratively. You never know who might try to take advantage of a simple mistake. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had a Karen or HOA go too far? How did you handle it? So here's another story. This one goes all the way back to the early 90s, and believe it or not, it's still ongoing today. My wife and I bought our first house when we were both in our early 20s. We had worked hard for years, saved up every penny, lived in a tiny apartment, and finally made our dream of homeownership come true. It was such an exciting time for us, finding the right place, signing the paperwork, getting our keys, everything felt perfect. We moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood that seemed like a great fit. The price was fair, the location was good, and the house itself was exactly what we needed. The first few weeks were filled with painting, fixing things up, and just enjoying the idea that this was our home now. But about 2 months after we moved in, something strange happened. We got a letter in the mail, official looking, addressed by name, and stamped with something called the Homeowners Association. According to the letter, we were already 3 months behind on HOA dues, and if we didn't pay over $900 immediately, they'd put a lien on our house. I remember showing it to my wife, completely confused. "Did you know anything about an HOA?" I asked her. She hadn't either. And honestly, neither had we during the entire home buying process. There wasn't any mention of mandatory HOA fees, no paperwork about joining an association, nothing. The next day, we took off work early and went straight to the HOA office. It was a small building near the neighborhood entrance. As soon as we walked in, we were greeted, if you can even call it that, by a woman who looked like she could be Karen's boss. Think perfectly styled blonde helmet hair, fake nails so long they looked dangerous, and a look on her face like we had personally offended her just by existing. "How can I help you?" she asked, clearly not thrilled to be doing so. We handed her the letter and explained we had just moved in, only been there a couple of months, and had never heard of the HOA before. This was the first we were hearing about any dues or membership. She gave us this look, like we were somehow beneath her, and said, "Every house in this neighborhood is part of the HOA. It's mandatory. You signed the agreement during closing." That's when my wife spoke up. "Can we see a copy of what we supposedly signed?" Mrs. Bradford, as her nameplate read, sighed dramatically, got up from her desk, and disappeared into the back room. A minute later, she returned with a folder and slapped a document down in front of us. "Right here," she said, pointing at the bottom of the page. "These are your signatures." We leaned in, and that's when we noticed something was wrong. The names were correct, ours were on the paper. But those were definitely not our signatures. My wife has signed her name the same way since high school, and this wasn't close. It looked like someone had just scribbled our names in cursive, trying to imitate them but failing badly. "This isn't our signature," I told her firmly. "Someone wrote our names, but we never agreed to this." Her reaction? She got flustered fast. "Well, this is the agreement we have on file," she snapped. "You're required to be part of the HOA. It's mandatory." I pushed back. "How can it be mandatory if we never agreed to it? This document was forged. Someone wrote our names here without our consent." That's when she started flipping through papers, clearly trying to find some kind of loophole. "I must speak with the board," she muttered. "You need to leave now." But we didn't leave. Instead, I pulled out my phone, yes, one of those old-school brick phones, because this was the 90s, and said, "Fine. While you talk to the board, I'll just call the police and report forgery." Let me tell you, the change in her demeanor was instant. She panicked, waved her hands, and said, "There's no need for that. Let's just work something out." I agreed on one condition, that she destroy the forged document and acknowledge that we were not part of the HOA. After a lot of arguing, she disappeared into the back again and came out with another woman, the HOA board president. This time, the approach was softer. "We understand there might have been some confusion during the closing process," the president said. "Why don't we start fresh? We can draw up a new agreement right now." "No thank you," my wife said. "We're not interested in joining the HOA." The president tried to insist. "But everyone has to be part of the HOA. Every house in this neighborhood is included." I corrected her. "Except ours. Because we never agreed to join and someone forged our signatures." That's when things really got interesting. The president's face turned pale. She whispered something urgently to Mrs. Bradford, something we caught bits and pieces of. Something like, "Unbelievable this happened again, and 5th house this month." Eventually, they came back with a forced smile and said they'd look into the issue and get back to us, and in the meantime, we should ignore the fine notice. We left feeling hopeful, but also certain this wasn't the end of it. And sure enough, the next day I started asking around the neighborhood and found out we weren't alone. Our next-door neighbors had gone through the exact same thing. Their names were on an HOA agreement they never signed. Same with a couple 3 houses down. Another family across the street too. Over the next few weeks, the HOA kept sending letters, each one taking a different approach. First, they tried sweet-talking us, listing all the benefits of being in the HOA. Then they shifted to threats, talking about property values, legal consequences, and how we were violating neighborhood rules. Well, that's when I decided to take things seriously. I hired a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. It cost us some money, but it was worth it. He sent the HOA a formal cease and desist letter outlining exactly how many laws they had broken by forging our names and trying to enforce a fraudulent contract. And guess what? They ghosted us. No response. No more letters. No lawyer threatening us. 30 years later, our house is still one of only 3 in the entire neighborhood not part of the HOA. We can paint our house any color we want, park our RV wherever we like, and yes, we even put up Christmas decorations in October just to remind them we don't answer to their rules. It drives them absolutely nuts. Over the years, they've tried various tactics to pressure us into joining again. But we've held our ground. Sometimes my wife and I wonder if we're being too petty, like maybe we should tone it down a bit. But then we remember how they started this mess by forging our names and trying to scam us into paying dues we never agreed to. And yeah, we occasionally do things just to remind them who's in control of our own home. Like parking the RV in the driveway. Or putting up holiday lights in October. Small rebellions, sure, but we feel like we earned them. So Reddit, am I the a-hole for refusing to join the HOA after they forged our signatures and still poking at them a little? Let me know in the comments, do you think OP is the a-hole here, or was he completely justified? One commenter said, "You're the a-hole. You're using a decades-old mistake to justify being a troublemaker. HOAs exist to maintain standards and protect investments. Yeah, they messed up, but you're just being selfish under the guise of righteousness." Another replied, "Everyone sucks here. The HOA committed fraud, obviously wrong. Their continued attempts to force you to join are sketchy. But your gleeful antagonism suggests you enjoy pushing their buttons a bit too much. You could stand your ground without provoking them so much." And a third comment hit closer to home. Not the a-hole. Former HOA board member here. What they did was inexcusable. They keep trying to pressure you because they know they have no legal standing. That's why they use social pressure instead of actual legal action. To this day, we're still not part of the HOA and probably never will be. We follow all local laws and regulations, maintain our property well, and live life on our terms. Because at the end of the day, we shouldn't have to be bullied into giving away control of our home, especially not by people who forged documents to try and pull us in. Let me know what you think. Would you have done the same? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. These kinds of HOA showdowns are exactly why I keep coming back to share these stories. Alright, so to wrap up today's video, let's take a look at one more story, this time from r/malicious compliance. The title says it all. You want me to work my exact hours? Okay, no problem. So, a few years ago, OP's manager decided he wanted to crack down on discipline in the workplace. He was tired of people coming in late or leaving early, and he wanted everyone to follow their schedules to the letter. His first rule? Everyone had to work exactly their scheduled hours, not a minute more, not a minute less. If your shift was 9 to 5, then that meant you couldn't start early or stay late. No exceptions. Now, OP wasn't thrilled about the rule, but they figured, okay, rules are rules. They're the kind of person who usually likes to finish what they start, even if it means staying past their shift to wrap up a call or send an important email. But now, that wasn't allowed anymore. So, OP made a choice. They were going to follow the rule to the letter. At exactly 5 p.m., they stopped everything. Mid-call with a client? Sorry, it's 5 o'clock. We'll have to pick this up tomorrow. Writing an email draft? Nope. They saved it, shut down their computer, and walked out right on the dot. And they weren't alone. A few other coworkers started doing the same thing. By 5:01, the office was basically empty. Every day, like clockwork, the place turned into a ghost town the second the clock hit 5. Well, it didn't take long for things to fall apart. Deadlines started getting missed. Clients were left hanging. Important emails went unfinished. People got frustrated, and customers definitely weren't happy. Management couldn't ignore it for long. After about 2 weeks of total chaos, the rule was quietly dropped. One morning, everyone showed up to find a new message in the group chat. Just do what you need to get the job done. It was almost like the whole thing never happened. But here's the best part, how fast everything changed when employees followed the orders just as they were given. All it took was taking the rules seriously for management to realize that strict timekeeping doesn't always make for good leadership. Honestly, it's kind of hilarious how often this happens. People in charge sometimes forget that real work doesn't fit perfectly into a 9 to 5 box. And when they try to force rigid rules, someone always finds a way to remind them why that doesn't work. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow.